Welcome everybody. I will go ahead and share the screen here and let me maybe view it as that. All right. And I am going to turn it over to Lisa to introduce the session.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to be here and have you at our session. We're a team from IUPUI, and this session is about journey mapping as a precursor to the ePortfolio. My name is Lisa Angermeyer, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Kinesiology. I also coordinate our first-year experience in our School of Health and Human Sciences, and I have a senior faculty fellowship with the Office for the Institute for Engaged Learning, where I work with first-year experience. And I'll hand it now to Mark.
Hey everybody, my name is Mark Ertel, and we think it's really important to offer a little bit of a context to us as presenters to where we're at and see if you can see yourselves through our lens and maybe similar, maybe different. And if we can move to that next slide, Rachel, that would kind of help give us the context to us. So we are situated in the heart of downtown Indianapolis, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. We clearly have an expressed life and health science presence. We are Indiana's premier campus for that. However, at the undergraduate level, we also have a fairly prominent liberal arts element to our curriculum, and that's expressed in that every major as part of their 120 credit hour, ideally 120 credit hour matriculation, takes a bank of 30 credits of general education electives. However, once you peak beyond the undergraduate level and look into the graduate and professional schools, we're clearly a STEM dominant campus. We have a large medical school on campus, and our professional schools have a life and health science slant to it. The last time we checked, I can't remember how current it is, we as a campus, according to Carnegie, are high research activity with high community engagement. The birthing of IUPUI, where we're situated, lended itself to community campus partnerships, and we've started that and maintained that. About 4 years ago, we were sniffing about 30,000 students for reasons that I think are self-evident. We're a little bit lower than where we were at one point, but right around that 28,000 student enrollment. There are 17 degree granting schools, and we are the 5th largest school in the School of Health and Human Sciences. Again, the key element is the community organizations engaged in research or service learning with IUPUI. We lean heavily into that community campus partnership. So hopefully knowing a little bit about us and where we're situated and our context will help better appreciate and understand our journey as we move forward.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Fallowfield. I am a lecturer in the Department of Kinesiology with this great team. And a little bit of context of our department. The cornerstone of our mission is to provide a diverse student body with engaging, service-focused, and practical activities informed by evidence-based scholarly research. Our statement of culture, we are student-centered at heart. We have many community collaborations, as Mark alluded to, and focus on professional development. Our curriculum, we have embedded 9 high impact practices within our curriculum, and we do it very early and often throughout the curriculum. You met some of our team. I think Rachel will be up in a minute. And then our majors within kinesiology, in that umbrella, we have exercise science, fitness management and personal training, and also physical education, teacher education.
All right. So now that you have a gist of kind of IUPUI and our department and our team, we would like to learn from you. So if you wouldn't mind opening the chat and answering one or more of the following questions. So you could just give us a general introduction of who you are, where you're from, and why you are attending ABLE. If you're currently using ePortfolios, we're interested to know how you introduce them to students. What current challenges and problems do you face in your ePortfolio work? And then what are you hoping to gain from the session? So just answer one or more of those questions in the chat. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on our team and our project and where we've been and where we're going. So initially, our initial implementation, we focused the ePortfolio on career orientation, and that was an absolute failure. We actually wrote an article about that if you would like to look at that. But we were starting it in the first year seminar and focusing on careers, and it just wasn't where the students were or what the main benefit of ePortfolios was. So we took a little break and we did some professional development and did some reflection. We had some members who went to ABLE a few years ago and had an epiphany, realizing that we really needed to focus more on the process of creating the ePortfolio, the reflection, and for our students to become reflective practitioners. So we introduced the ePortfolio in the first year seminar course, and then we weave it throughout the core curriculum. So we're heavy at the first year and we're heavy at the senior level, but we realized we had some gap areas in the middle. So we started to incorporate academic advising. At one point, we had our director of academic advising actually as part of our team. And we came up with the idea of having, during all of our students in their sophomore year, go through an advising appointment where they meet with their advisor. So we've actually have a touch point now in that advising meeting, and then gather some data afterwards. So our goal now is to teach students the importance of self-reflection and then instilling those skills so that they become reflective practitioners. And we just completed year 4 of our ePortfolio re-implementation, and being part of the Institute was amazing. Working with Helen was amazing. It helped us so much. We've come so far. We still have a way to go, but I think we've really benefited from that. So those of you who are part of the Institute, I think you'll really enjoy it. So now I'm going to hand it to Mark.
And I have to say, before I start on this, as I was scanning the chat, I got to give a shout out to Brian from Florida State University. It's his first day on the job and he's here. That is so awesome. I was trying to scan through them all. I couldn't remember everybody because I think they might have cleared them out. So welcome for that. I think that's fantastic that you're investing time into hearing our journey, so you might not make the same mistakes we might have made, or at least you can kind of give advice. But failure's the best teacher, right? So anyway, here's where I want to build on this. As you can imagine, when we first started, as Lisa eloquently said, we had an end product in mind. Yet we introduced this to the first year students. And I think everybody can realize human nature, asking an 18 and 19-year-old to engage and invest in an assignment that'll help them with graduation is not always the most ideal. They can't see themselves there. It's not relevant. A lot can happen. So what we did is during this time off, and then beyond that, as we got reinvested, we started focusing on different elements. And one of them, as Lisa said, we wanted to bridge that first year to the capstone internship. One of the ways, and it's de-emphasized on the slide you're seeing, we spoke about that yesterday, was the advising touch point. Let's get other people involved, keep it at the fingertips of students, and great. Another way, as part of this recasting from product to process, is what's emphasized today, and we can see the problem getting students engaged and bought in. And that was with us as a team, and this is why I'm so excited to keep working with all of us, because we bring something so unique and beneficial to the program, was developing that journey mapping, and again leaning heavily into Helen's expertise. The Institute is sponsored by the AAC&U, coming up with a way early ePortfolio to start getting students ready to think that way, to see it differently, and not be overwhelmed like, oh, it's not going to matter for 4 years. We wanted them to get excited and enthused in the moment, and journey mapping was the way we landed on exploring that. So that's the gist of today.
All right, thanks, Mark. For those of you interested in being with the AAC&U Institute on ePortfolios, our project, which with great help, as we've mentioned, with our coach and mentor, Helen Chen, how we went about the process. We thought about students creating a journey map prior to their ePortfolios to practice reflection. And then the journey map served as a visual representation of a student's life journey this far. And we'll have examples coming up in slides, and also ask you to kind of get started and participate in your own journey map practice. Prior to the journey mapping, students completed a reflective practice self-assessment, and we're going to give you that self-assessment to show you here in a few slides. The journey mapping assignment was used as a teaching tool to explain the importance of
Steve, he froze.
I think our colleague Steve froze, right?
All right, I can take over for him until he unfreezes. But I did just add that reflective practice self-assessment directly there in the chat for anyone who wants to take a look at what that was. We did that pre and post the journey map and actually the ePortfolio project. So we used the journey map as a teaching tool to, I guess let me back up. Before that, we talked about reflection and we had students do the reflective practice self-assessment. And then we used the journey map as a practice of reflecting on their journey that they've had so far. So it's kind of this pre-reflection on their whole entire life journey up to the point of how they are now freshmen at IUPUI. So we did it in a 1-day 75-minute class period, and it was pen and paper, and it was pretty funny because I don't think students are used to that anymore, and I saw a lot of shaking hands and things like that. So that's one thing we're going to change in the future. The reflective part, we're going to allow them to use their laptop if they like. So the actual journey map assignment, and after I'm done kind of talking about it, I'm happy to put that in the chat as well. Basically, it consisted of 3 parts. So part 1 would ask students to identify all of their significant moments that they've experienced in their life that stand out as something significant that was either an aha moment, a really impactful moment, just something that was really meaningful to them, and either changed the course of their life or really helped them understand better who they were. Before we did this assignment, we did talk about how reflecting in this way may bring up very negative experiences. So we talked a lot about our counseling and psychological services that are available. We said you do not have to reflect on all experiences, only choose those ones that you would like to reflect on, and just it kind of trauma-informed pedagogy in that respect, that this could bring up some past trauma for students. So once they have identified, so the first part was they made a list. So they made a list of all of those significant moments. And I asked them to think from their earliest memory. So kind of think throughout their life, really significant moments that stood out. And then had them briefly describe each moment, just in like 1 to 2 sentences. Then a little bit more in detail, reflect on why it was significant. And those 2 questions, 1 and 2, are a small moment reflection, basically, is what we had them do for each of these experiences. And then the third thing was have them assign a feeling or emotion word or an emoji to that experience. So part 2, and you can imagine that there, took a long time. That took about 45 minutes to an hour, which is one reason why we're moving this assignment to 2 to 3 days instead of 1 day this fall. But part 2 asked students to then visually map their experience. And what we did last fall is we gave everyone I think it was 11 by 17 big piece of paper, and asked them to map their experience in a way that makes sense for them. We said it can look like a timeline, it can look like a treasure map, whatever your journey looks like for you. In the future, we're going to allow them to use, like a whiteboard or something, technology, instead of just paper. And then after this experience, the next class period is when we introduced the ePortfolio. So we really tried to connect the 2 in that this journey map shows you your current life path and how you got to where you are. And now your ePortfolio is going to serve as your current journey and future journey onto professionalism. So it's this living, piece of technology that represents you and your journey. So that was, in a sense, what the assignment was. And I do see a question in the chat. I'm curious, do you ever have students say nothing significant happened to me? I teach personal storytelling, and occasionally I have students who truly don't think anything significant happened to them. So we only piloted this with 25 students. I did not have that come up, but I could see how students might say that. So yeah, that's definitely probably an obstacle. So, and then Yitna said, I like the idea of keeping this activity on pen and paper. Yeah. So again, have questions come through the chat at any time. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to look at some examples.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so here are just a few examples from Rachel's class. You can see different ways of approaching this. And you can see on the second example too, I like they color coded it. So the pink, were happier things with the happy emoji, and then the blue were more negative things in their life. But you can see the different aspects that they chose to put into their journey map. Rachel, I don't know if you have anything else to add to these examples.
Not really. So these two students had these fancy pens with them. I would say the other examples were just done with a pencil. So it's not really about, I think that was the disadvantage, is that they couldn't make it very visual. These were the two kind of visual as far as what it looks like. And then, yeah, so that, again, this was a pilot with 25 students, and we learned a lot of lessons, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of that. I did see a question come in the chat.
A couple of them, actually, yeah.
A couple questions.
Yep.
All right, let me make my chat screen bigger, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Someone will say, I live on a farm a mile from the nearest neighbor. There's nothing unique or special about my experience. But that in and of itself is so unique, So hopefully letting students understand that maybe rephrasing it, not significant, just moments that stood out in your life, So maybe getting away from those keywords of significant or meaningful. And then Mary Kay asked, what about students having past trauma? How do you address or handle that? So I'm getting ready to put the assignment in the chat. Like I said earlier, we emphasize that they don't have to reflect on all experiences, they can choose. And then we give them, before this activity, resources to our counseling and psychological services that are available for students. So I think really just being aware that this is it's gonna happen for some students. It may bring up those really bad memories. And I've had some conversations with people. One person suggested just focus on the positive, but then you're missing out. Not all life experiences that shape us are positive. So I think just having those resources there and available for students is key. Yeah. So I think it is Mark.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we would respectfully ask all of you to ponder these prompts that are up on the screen, leaning back into what we did earlier by just the introductions. Also address this in the chat or unmute yourself. So first of all, have you experienced similar challenges with student buy-in, engagement, ownership of e-portfolios? If so, what did that look like, or what did that not look like? For our benefit, so we can kind of calibrate ourselves, it'd be awesome if we could get a sense of, have you folks heard of journey mapping within this context or in and of itself, and have you used it within this context? Then you could ponder any interesting observations from our experience, any connections. Can you see yourself through this lens? Would you anticipate a similar journey, or is this completely novel? And then generally speaking, do you have any questions, comments, or thoughts for us so that we can kind of keep our momentum moving forward and trying to develop this robustly? And before as you're chatting, I guess I would cue Rachel for the elevator music to get everybody in the mindset. And then, or unmute, or just offer something in the chat. We would love to learn from all of you and address some thoughts, answer some questions, or ask questions.
Sonia, you have a question?
Well, I just was going to comment, but with Zoom, I find it's better to raise my hand. I'm never sure when people are done talking or going to talk. But this is very familiar to me and what I do with my students over the year. But I teach students, the majority of my students are transitioning from high school to college. So they have to write like some kind of transformation essay as part of that, college going, getting ready experience a lot of the time. And so they're kind of thinking about that, and it makes sense to them because it's concrete value to them for something outside of class. Like when you talk about this transformative experience and your journey and how you got where you are, then you can put that in a narrative that you send to college for scholarships and those kinds of things. So there's stakes attached to that. And so I wonder, like, if you're teaching, and some of that might be readily apparent with seniors in college or like grad students or those kinds of things. But if you're looking at, I think a lot of retention issues come between freshman and sophomore year. Like the first year of college, it's really hard to keep going sometimes. And so like, what would be the concrete usefulness that could come out of this kind of exploration in the middle years of an undergrad, I think would be something to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And something that we did not do that we're planning on doing is we didn't have students add this journey map to their e-portfolio. I think we're going to have them add a portion of it and reflect on it in their kind of about me life journey. And maybe at that sophomore academic advising appointment would be a great time for our students specifically, because they're all meeting with that academic advisor one-on-one. And part of that meeting is the e-portfolio to talk about their current journey map, and how do they see that shaping, and how is it different from what they anticipated? Because part of the journey map we didn't talk about is that they are kind of talking about experiences that they might want to do. And, how different is that going to be a year and a half later as a sophomore compared to a freshman? Yeah, great points.
I think a great untapped use for e-portfolios is as an advising tool during the journey of undergrad.
Yes, absolutely. And that's hopefully part of what we're trying to get at with adding that to advising. So thank you so much, Sonia. I wanted to talk about Andrew's comment in the chat because I think it's one that's really important to talk about. And he said that sometimes he's found in his work is that students who have not had trauma say something like, my story's dumb and boring. So to try to emphasize, trauma stories are not the ideal, they're not the goal. So that's a really interesting observation that you've had from your work. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else comment, question before we move on, or anything else I missed in the chat? Yitna asked, have students turned such a journey map directly into an e-portfolio? And yes, at the senior level, before this freshman pilot, I piloted it with a capstone course about their college journey. And one of the students directly correlated that to her e-portfolio, which is a really, I forget which platform she used, but it's really cool how you navigate her journey in her e-portfolio. I'd have to do some digging to find it, but yeah, it was really cool what she came up with. Oops, let me go back. All righty. So again, if you have more questions, keep those in the chat. But what were our kind of lessons learned from just this one semester pilot that we did last fall? We as instructors, so it was myself, an academic advisor was in the classroom, and a student peer mentor. So we did this in our first year seminar course. We really enjoyed this activity. And it was a nice introduction to reflection and that e-portfolio. So this activity really allowed students to practice that reflection, specifically in class, create an artifact. So we were able to say this journey map serves as the artifact for what you just did with your reflection. It was a really nice segue into that e-portfolio the next week. In the future, we are going to add, even prior to this class, a basic introduction and just small group discussion about what are your current reflective practices? Do you journal? Do you meditate? Like, what are your current reflective practices before just diving into that journey map? And then in the future, we're going to split it into 2 or 3 days. So day 1 being introduce the reflective practices and then identify all of those significant moments. And then day 2 is when we're going to have them identify future experiences they believe they need, and then introduce that e-portfolio. So, and I'm trying to think about, because I've already kind of written this out, and I think it's even changed since this. I believe we're going to do it in 3 days now. So we're spreading it out quite a bit.
Through this work with our journey mapping in the e-portfolio, we were excited about being published in an ebook. And this, as you can see, it documents what Lisa and Rachel talked about with the challenges we experienced, how we assessed, and the design of that assessment, and also a little bit of an example of journey mapping from a student and the reflection. So very nice opportunity to share the work.
And I did just drop that into the chat if you want to take a little bit of a deeper look at that.
Okay, so we just have some more reflection questions we'd like to get your input on. So again, as we did before, if you want to jump in the chat or unmute, have you experienced any similar challenges with buy-in? What are we overlooking? Do you have any suggestions or other things we should think about? Do you incorporate ePortfolio into academic advising? And can you use anything that we've shared with you to help or inform others, or do you have other things to share with us that might help us? And then what other questions do you have? Kimberly shared, after hearing about this, I think this activity of journey mapping and ePortfolios would be a great addition to our 3-semester library research fellows program. That sounds interesting. Our biggest obstacle, Mary Kay says, our biggest obstacle with students right now is our digital platform. What are you using for a platform, and do you have any suggestions? Mary Kay, that's a great question, and I'll get us started and then anybody else can jump in. But so initially our campus used TaskStream, and that was horrible. It was a terrible experience. It was cumbersome, and our students didn't have access to it afterwards. So then our campus sponsored a couple platforms, Google Sites and CN. And we as a team have decided we are platform agnostic. And I think Megan coined that term, but we let students choose because we think it's important for them to choose a platform that suits them best. So I think a lot of our students use Wix. So Google Sites is supported by campus, so they can get technical support from our university computer people, but I think Wix is probably the biggest choice. Rachel, is that true?
Yeah, I believe when we did our research, it was about 70% of students use Wix, followed by Google Sites as the next highest.
Yeah, I think it's also a way, and we had an article and we talked about this last April about a way to be more inclusive. I found in my experiential learning with students in my large intro class, give an example of a student that was actually in high school, but through a special program, she was able to take the introduction class, and she was petrified about the IT aspect of it and about the platforms and some of the examples we already had. And I worked with her and told her, you're able to use anything that you're comfortable with. And she used a unique web platform, and she ended up doing great and loved it, and her confidence built. So it was a way to include her and not exclude her from that learning process. So that's one reason why we believe in that agnostic stance.
And we're actually having that conversation at the campus level. Rachel is actually now, Rachel and Debbie are co-directors of our ePortfolio program. And we had a meeting this summer, and my perspective is that because we had a lot of our computer people there, the platform shouldn't drive these conversations. It's not about the platform. It's about the process and students reflecting. So I hope as a campus, we can kind of move to more of being platform agnostic than focusing on one or two platforms. So great comment and thoughts. Sonia, I would like to see ePortfolios and advising on the list for the next annual meeting. I am working on the summer bridge for incoming freshmen at I'm assuming PSU, and have suggested using ePortfolios in this way. So yeah, I think that's an untapped area that we could definitely do more with. Great suggestion. Anna, I've experienced issues with student buy-in. Last year, it was maybe February or March before I felt like we were in a good place with the ePortfolios. Wish I had more students coming in, having done them before. Students who had done them before or were currently working with other teachers doing them bought in a lot faster. We use Canvas ePortfolios. Okay.
Is the Canvas ePortfolio, is that Portfolium? Is that, I believe that's the one tied to Canvas.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Megan, I also think it would be interesting to think how this might be altered for a variety of unique student audiences, international, online, non-traditional, military. Absolutely. Suggest not mandating platform, but giving options. Cynthia uses a value exercise by integrating it into ePortfolio on-ramp. I'm considering here is something I have not yet done. We'll let you know. Okay, we'll look forward to hearing about that next year.
Yeah.
Do you see, Elaine, do you see as problematic to do journey mapping around a particular focus, such as creativity for my honors class, or is it better to just leave things open-ended?
So I can talk on this a little bit, and I think is answering another question in students that might need help with kind of reflecting on these experiences. We ask them to do it very brief. So when I say describe the experience, and I do have written down somewhere what I exactly said, but I think it was one sentence explaining whatever the moment was in your life, and then maybe 1 to 3 sentences is maybe what I said. Reflect on it. Why was that meaningful? What did you learn from it? And then that either emoji, so like a smiley face or a frowny face or a feeling word. So instead of really focusing there on that emotion, they could get creative that way. So I think in giving options, there were 2 students that were very brief with their reflections, but in their map, you could still see their journey. So I think understanding that students reflect in very different ways and allowing options and how students can reflect is key to that. Yeah, so I think that answered Brian's question as well. Hopefully.
Rachel, I don't know if we need to move on to practicing since we're
Yeah, we'll do that. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to think back and do a very abbreviated professional journey map. So we're going to look at what has led you to this point in your profession. And I can give you an example of when I did this. The earliest moment for me was in 5th grade. So I do want you to think back through your whole life. What has got you to where you are right now? So think back on your past experiences prior to becoming a professional, currently in your professional life, and just make a list of all moments or experiences that stand out as meaningful, significant, or impactful. And then you're just you can like make a note on your computer, phone, pen and paper. So take a moment and do this. So after you've made that list, and I know we're not giving you a whole lot of time because I want to allow time for more questions at the end, but I just want you to choose your top 3 from the list. So what are your top 3 that have led you to this point in your career? And again, one of mine was at a camp for 5th grade. I would say my second one was probably sophomore year of high school when I had a math teacher believe in me, the first person that ever made me feel smart, that kind of, led me into mentoring other students. And then my third one would probably be doing undergraduate research. Just to kind of give you an example. And then for each of those moments, briefly describe in just a few words what it was. So, for example, that 5th grade, I attended this mandatory camp at Bradford Woods for all 5th graders from my school. Reflect on why it was significant. I fell in love with this thing called team building and leadership and outdoors. And then assign a feeling or emotion word. I would probably just say fun for that one. And then the last part would just be to think about if you were going to visually map your journey to professionalism. So I have a little bit backwards on the slide. If you were to map your journey to professionalism using these 3 experiences, what would it look like? So how might that look for you, knowing that the map can look like a timeline, it can look like a treasure map, it can be whatever you want it to look like. And I will say that if you attended Amy, I'm probably going to pronounce her last name wrong, but Sacchino's session yesterday on your professional e-portfolio and your brand statement, this would be something awesome to add to your e-portfolio if you're making a professional e-portfolio. So just kind of a pitch for that if you attended that. Helen, is she doing that session again today?
Yes, she is.
Awesome.
Yeah, all 3 of those workshops will be repeated today. So if you went to one but not the other, but if you didn't catch Amy's, it is really excellent. And those resources will also be available too.
Okay. Yeah. Because as in all things, if we practice what we preach and we have our own professional e-portfolio to share with students, how fabulous is that? All right. So on that, would anyone be willing to unmute and share, if we could just hear maybe from 1 or 2 people, what were the 3 things that you had on your journey map to professionalism? Anyone?
Hi.
I'll share. Oh,
Yay.
Go ahead, Anna.
Oh, okay, I'll go. I'm Anna and I teach high school. My 3 events were, one was in 4th grade, was a creative writing assignment that I did. And the verb I assigned to that, or the emotion, was joy. I just remember feeling very creative and joyful about writing for the first time. And then my second one was about 10 years ago when I went to a professional development for personalized learning, and also felt kind of a creative urge around teaching, which I hadn't felt in a really long time. And then my third one was when I found a colleague that had a similar interest in personalized learning and introduced me to the idea of e-portfolios and how to use that it was more kind of collaborative with students. It was about the product, but it was also about just how to be more collaborative and also help students be more creative. So that's it for me.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Anna. Emily, did I see you unmute as well?
Sure, I can go. So 7th grade, I remember protesting because they wouldn't let girls wrestle on the wrestling team, but I was better than my brother who was a year older, and he went to state, and I was like, why can't I go? And then high school, I got bored by the curriculum. It didn't make sense. I didn't understand why it mattered, and I dropped out and ended up going to an alternative school. And then I tried traditional college. And again, I was like, I'm not doing this. It doesn't make sense. I don't care. Like, why does it matter? And then I transferred to the Evergreen State College, which had portfolios way back then because it's evaluation based education. And I think all of that comes to this, like, it has to matter. It has to be relevant. It has to be meaningful. And it can't be oppressive or assimilationist, right? Like, I don't want to conform. I want to use education to like find who I am. And I think a lot of students feel the same way. And then to me, I would chart it as a circle because I didn't ever think I would be leading an ePortfolio office, but reflective praxis is very much my passion. It's what I've studied. So yeah, even though I didn't imagine it, I landed exactly in the place that fits really well.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing, Emily. Anybody else like to share? It looks like Debbie shared in the chat, working at a print shop in college. VP and advancement pulled her aside to say that she could create content rather than print others. Working in admissions, undergrad mentor said she could teach students rather than recruit them. And then Susan Kahn, ePortfolio, retired professional from IUPUI, provided grant support in her efforts to shift paper to ePortfolio. Awesome. Love it. Yes. Thank you all for sharing so much. We are officially finished with our presentation. There's our emails. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you for allowing us to share our journey of journey maps. If you have any questions, let us know.
Well, please join me, and hopefully you can hear me now, but please join me in thanking this amazing team and for this wonderful session, which is inspiring on so many fronts. Again, their contact information here, and Brian, a special welcome to you, to the ABLE community. Again, it's a very generous and collegial community, and certainly, I know that any of us would welcome any sort of follow-up and additional resources, questions that you might have as you continue in your own journey.